Minister Paudie Coffey, I was glad to welcome him here. He has special responsibility for housing, planning and coordination of Construction 2020. That's the strategy that's been laid out for the construction industry. He's going to open today's summit, and he's going to give you an overview on the government strategy. Paudie was first elected to the Dáil in 2011. He served a term in the Seanad before that, and he was the Fine Gael spokesman on the environment, and he also served on the Environment Committee in the Oireachtas. So he's certainly well versed in all matters relating to property and construction, and certainly I just want to put on the record that the access that we've had in CIF to him and his availability has certainly been second to none. Paudie, before he joined the elite in Leinster House, he worked with ESB Networks and eventually in their design department there, and he's a very, very proud Waterford hurling supporter and looking forward to going all the way this year. So Paudie, you're very, very welcome, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Tom. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, can I say it's a pleasure for me to attend this summit and to witness, first of all, the level of activity, as we've seen from the various stands, that's out there. It gives me a sense of encouragement that the various stakeholders, including yourselves, are gearing up, I think, for the recovery and the growth phase that certainly is about to visit us on this in this country. I think you also have a very interesting lineup of speakers and interesting debate today, something that I will be following closely, because I think it is important that we listen to all of the stakeholders and what they have to contribute in terms of how we address the challenges in the construction sector. Can I especially thank Colin Murphy and Tom Maloney and their teams from the Construction Information Services for organising this event, because it does, for me, it brings together all of the stakeholders in the one place, I suppose, debating, thinking, focusing on the challenges and the opportunities that lie ahead in the coming year and years. And as Tom has said, the recovery mode is vital for the construction sector. This sector, more than most, I would say, was more badly hit in terms of the economic downturn and the economic crash that we sustained in this country. But we need to get back to sustainable levels of construction if we're to meet the very real needs of people and citizens in terms of housing, in terms of facilities, in terms of services, whether it's schools, hospitals, and of course companies and business as well. But it needs to come back to sustainable levels and to a normalised construction market. And Tom is right. I think, any economist, and I'm not one, but any economist will tell you that a healthy construction sector will contribute approximately 12% of GNP. And, for a period there, we were only operating at half of that activity level. And there are encouraging signs that I'll speak about in a few minutes, that activity level is starting to increase, and I think, we need all to be a part of that. But it needs to be sustainable in how we rebuild Ireland and in terms of building sustainable communities. And for my own part, as Minister with special responsibility for housing, planning and Construction 2020 strategy, I want to say a few words on government's priorities and to outline the policy steps that we are taking. Firstly, I want to make it clear that we're not going back to the boom-bust cycle that beset the construction sector and this economy previously. And I think we all agree that the overheating in the construction sector ultimately did nobody any good, and that includes the economy, the sector itself, but more importantly the citizens that were affected by the economic crash that we suffered. It has taken a huge toll in terms of not only the builders that were building houses, but people's personal lives and the economy itself. And if we're to avoid a repeat of that, we just must have sustainable levels of development, supply and demand at normalised levels. So there are two main policy responses from government that I want to mention today. One is the Construction Strategy 2020 and also the Social Housing Strategy 2020. Construction 2020 was announced by government essentially to address a lot of the shortfalls and to try and incentivise and bring back the construction sector to the normalised level that we're speaking about. And we want to do that in a number of ways. Number one, the sector must have a sustainable proportion of GNP, which I've already referred to. We also want to increase jobs by up to 60,000 people, and as we all know, especially in this sector, we lost vast experience, trades and skills from many people having to leave the country because simply work was not there. And we want to create sustainable levels of activity so many of these people can come home again with that experience. And we also want to attract young people into the trades and into the construction sector as well. I myself are visiting, a number of secondary schools at the moment. And, for very good reason, a lot of parents have been advising their kids not to go into the construction professions and trades over the last number of years. But I think now, with the recovery and the signs of confidence coming back, it's about time we engaged again with those parents and schools and young people and say that there is a future indeed for construction professions and trades in this country again, and to encourage that skill set to develop, because if we don't, we're going to be left with very serious deficits, and I think that has been already acknowledged by the various stakeholders. Tom has referred to the challenge in terms of housing, and there is indeed, especially in Dublin, a real challenge. And the government and the housing agency have identified that we do need approximately 25,000 housing units per annum to meet the demand that faces us. And it doesn't mean that they're all 3-bed semi-detached. There's a mixture in there. I think a very high percentage of demand now is just one-person units. So there has to be a mixture of appropriate development in terms of housing and apartments to meet that need. So in order to progress this, I've been working across various government departments to meet some of these challenges. The alignment of the planning and development system is one important area that we need to look at, and we need to attract further investment to meet the infrastructural needs that are there. So that's something we are addressing. Also, some new and innovative investment funding and investment models, because as we all know, and especially builders and developers, access to credit is a serious barrier at the moment in terms of getting projects going. We have a lot of existing sites in Dublin and around the country that have planning permission, they're ready to go, but unfortunately access to credit is causing an issue, and we need to unlock that potential so that we can get people building the units we badly need. And again, the manpower planning to ensure that we have the right skill sets to meet the demand that's rising as we speak. So progress is being made on a number of those fronts, but further progress is needed. With regard to the planning and the legislative programme, government has introduced 2 planning bills. The first planning bill is called the Housing and Urban Regeneration Bill, and in fact I'm introducing that bill to the Dáil this evening for the first time, and it will be an opportunity over the coming weeks to have that bill debated in both houses of the Oireachtas. And that's going to deal with a number of aspects that we feel would incentivise development in terms of the planning programme. One of those is there will be flexibility for local authorities to allow retrospective application of reduced development contribution charges. So essentially what that means, where existing planning permissions exist and there's quite high planning conditions in terms of development charges, and it's making the whole viability of that project unviable, well then the local authority will have the flexibility to reduce those development charges to make that project viable and to get the housing units built on it. We're also revising the Part 5 element of the social housing obligation, where we're proposing to reduce that obligation from 20% to 10% of a project in any scheme over 9 houses. And again, that's to address the viability issue. Obviously, over the last number of years, with very little private housing development happening, we were getting no return from the social housing element at all, which has to be addressed. We are also removing the flexibility for a trade-off of a cash payment instead of the social housing units being delivered. And I think that is only right, given the housing demand that's out there at the moment, that when the developments are happening, we want to see actual housing units and apartments being delivered. We're also introducing, I suppose, in a carrot and stick approach, what we call the vacant site levy. And just to explain this is to incentivise the development of sites of high potential in the middle of our towns and cities. These are sites that might be lying vacant for one reason or another, and if there's no reasonable reason why that site is not being developed, well, local authorities will be given the power to add that site to a register of vacant sites, and a 3% levy per annum will apply to that site. And I suppose the rationale for that is it's to try and focus urban regeneration in the cities and towns to bring, I suppose, footfall and living life back to those towns and cities. These are places where we already have public infrastructure on the footpaths, essentially. There's potential in these sites that we need to unlock, rather than first focusing on, the suburbs and urban sprawl, as I would call it. So there is a focus going to be through this legislation on regeneration of sites, and I would urge all stakeholders, whether they be owners, developers, builders, local authorities, planners, that we put a serious effort into turning these sites around. Now, there might be good reason for a lot of them not to be developed. They could be brownfield sites, there could be contamination issues, which all obviously add to cost. But where there is no reasonable reason for these being developed, well, then we need to address them, and I think people will agree with that. In the autumn, we will be bringing forward what we call the number 2 planning bill, and that will be brought before government shortly to get approval to publish. And that bill is being brought forward with a view to enact by year end. It will deal with a number of recommendations from the Mahon Tribunal. One of them, the main one I suppose, is the establishment of a planning regulator to ensure that we have independent oversight of planning systems in our country, to ensure that they are working in the best interests of our citizens, and that's the way it should be. And we are also adopting a new national planning framework, which will replace the National Spatial Strategy that has had limited success to some degree, I would argue, around the country. So, we need to see balanced regional development, good functioning planning system, transparent oversight and good alignment of priorities in government, in local authorities and in the private sector as well. I mentioned the viability of projects earlier, and I know there was some controversy around that this morning about some letter that myself and Minister Kelly wrote to local authorities. But the reason for that letter, local authorities at the moment are adopting their county development plans, and we all have high aspirations for our own communities and our own areas. And indeed, I was a councillor myself for 8 years, and I had very aspirations that we have the best quality communities, buildings and amenities, and that's the way it should be. But we need to be careful that we don't price ourselves in terms of some regulations that we impose in terms of the cost and the viability of projects, that the projects are priced out of the market altogether. And that's the reason essentially for the letter, just to inform local authorities to be conscious and aware that regulations do cost a lot of money, and we won't get the delivery of the 25,000 houses that we need if we over-regulate and over condition planning applications. And it is, and I recognise the independence of local authorities, but it's a view that's shared by many in government, and indeed the housing agency are doing a lot of good work in terms of planning viability at the moment, from concept to design, to build and to delivery. So it's an important area we need to keep our focus on over the next period. Just to say a few words about housing, I think the commercial sector has been reasonably buoyant and it's starting to lift for some time, and it's great to see those signs of economic recovery. But housing is crucial, both for Ireland's people but also for competitiveness of the nation. And jobs have been an absolute priority for this government since taking office, and breaking the 10% unemployment target early is a solid achievement. But to sustain this, we need more homes and we need more house building in places where demand is. So in terms of meeting this ambitious target of 25,000 per annum, it is challenging, and we're coming from a very low base, but we are moving now in the right direction. Just some statistics for your information: from 8,000 house completions in 2013, we went up to 11,016 in 2014, and there was approximately 2,600 completions in the first quarter of this year. That's up 26% on the same period last year, but we still have a long way to go. It's interesting to note that planning applications are up 29% for the first 5 months of this year in comparison to the same period last year, and that's all across all sectors, which is encouraging. And the commencement notices this year are at approximately 3,500. So there is in the pipeline some considerable projects that still have to come forward for construction. And I think that should give us some reason for optimism, that we are moving in the right direction, but now the real challenge is in how we deliver these in a cost-effective and accelerated way. Just a word about social housing. NESC has estimated that up to 1/3 of Irish people will have difficulty in meeting their housing needs in the future. And while jobs and recovery is the best way to help people to meet those needs, the government is committed to helping those that can support themselves. And since taking my office last July, both myself and Minister Kelly, one of the first things we did was we worked across government departments to try and ring-fence substantial funding for investment in a substantial social housing project. And that's now called the Social Housing Strategy 2020, which was launched last November. It provides opportunities right around the country for all stakeholders to involve themselves in delivering these units. The first number of months, once that strategy was announced, we sought proposals from all the local authorities around the country. They were then assessed, and we made the first announcement over a month ago for projects, direct build projects, for the first time in a generation for local authorities right around the country. That was over €300 million of an announcement, and in the coming weeks we will have another announcement where the voluntary housing bodies, they were asked to bring forward proposals for projects that they can deliver additional units, and we will be allocating substantial funding to those bodies in the coming weeks. And following that again, we will go back to the second round of allocations to the local authorities for further house building projects around the country as well. So there is a lot in the pipeline. It's not a matter of provision of funding, that's there. It's not a matter of provision of staff for local authorities, because we've allocated over 300 additional staff to local authorities, to their housing departments and their planning departments, so that they can ramp up in preparation for this ambitious programme. The Social Housing Strategy sets out a comprehensive approach to the delivery of social housing up to 2020. It commits to delivering an additional 35,000 social housing units through an investment of €3.8 billion over the next 6 years. As I said, recently Minister Kelly and I announced the first tranche, which is €312 million for over 100 shovel-ready projects around the country that will deliver 1,700 social housing units. And we expect that a lot of those are actually underway now as we speak. This is just a kickstart to the local authority programme. There will also be an acquisition programme, because obviously while we're waiting on houses to come on stream through the building, we do need to buy up some houses where value for money exists and where demand is strong. This programme, we estimate, will create approximately 3,000 jobs in the construction sector. It is a challenge for local authorities, but I am urging those, and both Minister Kelly and I have gone around to meet local authorities, to ensure that they're aligned with our ambition and that they're putting the adequate resources into delivering these units. Last Friday, my department's planning section actually hosted an event under Construction 20 in Croke Park, and there were some excellent examples of builders building top quality social and private homes side by side, and this is what we need, and we need to see more of it. Financing, as I mentioned earlier, is obviously crucial, and from my interaction with the sector, it's a nut we still need to crack in terms of residential projects. The sustainable financing model going forward requires both senior debt finance and equity finance. This financing model is the time-tested, internationally accepted approach to funding development, and it was the norm before the boom and bust became place in Ireland. Earlier this year, Minister Noonan hosted a financing construction conference in association with the industry, and the purpose of this was to stimulate discussion and debate on sustainable financing for the construction sector. The Department of Finance recently published its report on access to finance for construction and development, and that's available on its website. This report highlights the increasing levels of capital available for financing viable construction and development projects. And in the same vein, Minister Kelly and I hosted a social housing financing conference. This was a specific conference focused on the delivery of social housing. A structured formal process of engagement with the proposers of social housing investment and delivery has been put in place under a clearinghouse protocol, and I would invite anybody that's interested in being involved in the provision of social housing to engage with my department in this regard. Work is also progressing between my department and other relevant players on an off-balance sheet mechanism and public-private partnerships. And again, this is to try and think outside the box and looking at ways of delivering construction projects and housing in a different way. And again, I would encourage anybody that has ideas and proposals in this regard to engage with my department. The financing solution requires innovation and partnership between the financing and development sectors. It is happening, and there have been some very encouraging recent announcements. And I would ask you all to consider working with us to find more solutions that work for everybody. The demand for residential projects is there, it's real, and if it's not met, it will adversely affect our competitiveness. But more importantly, it will mean people don't have the homes that they badly need. I just want to say a few words about manpower planning and the skill sets that's required in our sector. Another key piece of the jigsaw is ensuring that we have the right skills and training that in place to allow us to deliver the ambitious targets that we have. The overall apprentice registrations for the existing 27 trades are up 40% on the same figures in 2013. And that's another encouraging statistic. And the latest CSO figures show that the construction sector grew by 6,300 in the last quarter, and we expect to see that getting stronger. So the trend is continuing, and the most recent apprenticeship forecasts anticipate that these growth trends will continue generally until 2018. And I would take the opportunity for those of you that have the opportunity to take on apprentices, that you would look ahead and maybe give the opportunity to young people to enter into the construction trade. I myself was an apprentice over 20 years ago, and it's something I never regretted. It's something that we should encourage. For a while, I think, it was looked at in disdain, I would say, by some schools and colleges and advisors. We need young, skilled people in this sector. So, there is nothing to be ashamed of becoming an apprentice. It opens so many doors and so many avenues as people can upskill as they go through their work experience. The Department of Education and Skills and Solace have been engaging directly with the Construction Industry Federation on the key trades, and I would encourage everybody to maintain that momentum. The indicators I mentioned are very positive, and Ireland now has much more to offer those young construction workers, and we do want to bring many of our experienced construction workers home, many of those that have emigrated. Just to say a few words about the Construction Industry Register of Ireland, which underpins in legislation essential consumer protection measures. The legislative proposals in this regard are currently being prepared by my department with a view to them being presented to government for consideration in the near future. It is important that we learn from the mistakes of the past and that we ensure we have quality in construction. You and I know that public tolerance for poor quality buildings has been well and truly exhausted. To its credit, I might add, the construction industry has responded well, and I would like to acknowledge the proactive and positive engagement which my department has received from the sector in recent years in reforming the building control regulatory framework. We now have a credible regulatory framework which empowers competence and professionalism in design and construction, and which requires owners, builders and professionals to account for their statutory obligations. In keeping with the commitment given by government prior to its introduction, Minister Kelly and I recently announced a review of these regulations following the first 12 months of operation, and any changes arising from the recent public consultation on further steps that could be taken will be tended to as a matter of priority. Before I wrap up, I must mention environmental sustainability and the government's policy, green public procurement. Government expenditure on capital programmes accounts for around 50% of the output of the construction sector, and there is another capital stimulus plan on the horizon. I think that will be a huge boost to the economy and to the construction sector as well. But green public procurement represents an excellent opportunity to minimise the environmental impacts of construction activities, while reducing the cost of building and infrastructure from a life cycle perspective. Procurement across all government departments and agencies accounts for 10% to 12% of Ireland's GDP, or approximately €14 billion per annum. Including sustainable and green practices in public procurement can help to drive significant behavioural change, as well as supporting the expansion of markets for green products and services. Green procurement has the potential to move the market towards the competitive provision of more sustainable products and services, and I hope the Irish construction sector takes up that mantle. And I do note, even from some of the stands that I've witnessed this morning as I went around, there are some exciting initiatives and innovations being introduced to the sector, and I think that's only right. So in conclusion, our construction industry is critical to this country's growth, both in creating jobs and in providing the crucial infrastructure in this country that's needed to compete globally. No matter how much progress we have made, there is still a great deal more to do, and to get the sector on a fully sustainable footing. For its part, the government is committed to putting the required policy and legislative framework in place and to invest in critical infrastructure. And I would encourage all of you, because you are all very important stakeholders at the coalface of this sector, to engage with my department, with local authorities in a proactive way. And I would expect my department and local authorities and planners to engage proactively with builders as well to meet the demand that's out there. So I want to thank you again, especially to the CIS, for inviting me here today. I think this is a very worthwhile event, preparing ourselves for the recovery in the construction sector. I think there's going to be some very interesting debates, not only today but later on as well, and I'll be pursuing and following those with interest. And I want to wish you all individually the very best, not only today but in the coming months and years ahead, as we all together contribute to a sustainable construction sector in this country again. Thank you all very much indeed.